Hi folks, and welcome to Tech with Troy. Today we're going to do a follow-on discussion about the Lenovo S340 that we got off of Walmart. If you'll remember, this thing was priced at $399 at the time we purchased it. It came with an i5 processor, 8 gig of RAM, and 128 gig SSD. I've actually been using this as sort of my daily driver in the course of teaching my classes for the past couple of weeks. I teach data science, and one of the things that's interesting is that we have a set of exercises that we've been doing that involve bringing in very large data sets, around 9.6 million rows, and this laptop is actually faster than the desktop that I developed the exercises on, in terms of if it brings it in. I want to say for most classes it was bringing it in around 1.5 minutes, and it's taking over 2.5 minutes on a desktop machine. That's indicative of the fact that the desktop machine's SSD is a couple of years old. SSDs have gotten faster, and definitely something to realize. But to be quite honest, I've been quite pleased with the snappiness and everything about this machine. And we've even gotten to the point where, while I still believe that the Lenovo ThinkPads have much better keys, I do like these keys. They are good, particularly for this price level. Now, the next stage, and what you see here on the screen, is I just finished cloning the SSD. Originally I discussed about maybe supplementing the amount of RAM that came with it and supplementing the SSD with a hard drive. I'm going to do that, and as a matter of fact, I've gone ahead and purchased those. The RAM that I'm going to use is going to be Crucial RAM, and I will put a link to this on the liner notes or show notes down below. I think right now it's selling for around $63, and as we discussed in the original unboxing, this Ideapad has 8 gig of RAM in it, 2 4 gig sticks, one of them soldered on, so I'll be able to replace one of the 4 gig sticks with this 16 gig stick and wind up with a total of 20 gig of RAM. Now, for most people it's going to be overkill. To be quite honest, if you're buying this thing just for day-to-day work, or even if you're buying it for gaming and you are, quote, a power user and you're doing things like Excel, 8 gig is still probably going to do you. I'm replacing it, moving it up to 20 gig just because the types of work I do require a little bit more oomph, if you will. The other thing that we talked about too was supplementing the SSD with a hard drive. Now I've gone ahead and purchased, and I think this was around $86 right now, I think, but I've gone ahead and purchased, and I will put links to this on the show notes as well, one of the FireCuda 2 terabyte hard drives that are designed for gaming. Again, with data science, it actually helps to have a little bit of a cache when you're reading from the hard drive, so it'll come in handy for me too. Now, the one thing I hadn't discussed, and the one thing I did go ahead and do, is I happen to have a somewhat older, maybe a year old, larger SSD hanging around, and this is a 500 gig SSD. I think right now the current versions of these are probably going for around $90. And yes, I realize you talk about $60 for that, you talk about $86 or so for that, and you talk about $90 for this, you're talking about a good deal of money. But again, I'm not really designing this so much for the typical person. I'm designing it so that I can use it. Now, of these three upgrades, the one that I actually would probably lean towards recommending would actually be upgrading the SSD. I do agree that I was dealing with, what could be considered somewhat large files in the course of my classes over the past couple of weeks. But to be quite honest, if you or somebody you're buying this for is going to play games on it or something, they're going to run out of space on that 128 gig SSD. And yes, you can say that certainly they could go ahead and supplement that with a hard drive, just boot off the SSD and then load the game files themselves on the hard drive. But they're still going to be happier if they put the SSD in. You don't need a 2 terabyte SSD. It's going to be prohibitively expensive. But these 500 gig SSDs have really come down in price, so I think that's the way to go. Now, the best way to do this, and I'll also put a link to a previous show from several months ago where I went through and detailed sort of the steps of cloning an SSD drive. The software is freely available. It's called Macrium Reflect, and they do provide home users, for non-commercial use, free access to something that will clone their SSD. You will need most likely an enclosure, though, and again, this enclosure, which I'll also put links to in the show notes, I think it's selling for around $23, and you take the new SSD, you pop it into this little case here. There we go. And the nice thing about this SSD enclosure, remember that this Lenovo, even though we can't charge it with USB-C, does have a USB-C port. So it took, I think, a total of 10 minutes and 57 seconds to back up a completely full 128 gig SSD onto the 500 gig SSD that I'm going to replace it with. So my plan now is to make all these replacements, use it for a while longer, and then get back to you in terms of long-term reflections. But to be quite honest, I'm very pleased with this. I think it'd be a great purchase for somebody. I posted a quick pick video, I think yesterday or earlier today, where I pointed out that they've actually lowered the price a little bit. I actually saw the price of this go down to $379 day before yesterday, but given the way Walmart messes around with the price, I think it's back up to $389. It's not the $399 that we purchased at, but it's probably going to waver between, I'd say, between $379 and $399 between now and at least the Black Friday period. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If so, please hit the like button, and we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Thanks a lot, and take care.